Welcome to The Lost Signals Discusses Film and TV. Using the revolutionary Manzur-Ramosi-Thurlow scale,
or MOTS,
we scrupulously review these art forms with an emphasis on narrative structure. Join us for another entertaining episode. Hello, and welcome back to The Lost Signals Discusses Film and Television. Today we have a little bit of a special. We actually got this movie from our friends over at Tri-Coast Entertainment. Thank you very much.
Right on.
And we are going to be discussing the movie Lava, directed by I.R. Blasco. So I'm going to be your host, Steve Ramosi, joined today by Scott Thurlow.
Rather snake.
Jonathan Ian Mazur.
Be my best 90s self.
And Christopher Morgan.
Cats are everywhere.
That's right. So, Ian, why don't you give us a log line?
This film is Flagpole Sitta, the animated series.
Indeed.
It's not sick, but it's not well either.
That's not well. So I'm going to start off with the plot, as much of one as there is, I suppose.
There is a plot.
The character Deborah, played by, or voiced, the American version voiced by Jeannie Garofalo. This was initially Spanish language.
Animated film, by the way, for you hadn't made
Yes.
that clear.
And she is a tattoo artist, encounters some weird things at a hangout watching some Game of Thrones type show. The TV goes dead and they start seeing a bunch of weird images. One of her friends goes catatonic. They're trying to figure out what's going on. Meanwhile, cats start invading Earth. Supposedly alien cats, I guess.
Giant cats.
They send away for some strange things. One of her friends gets abducted and taken to an artist colony, I guess. Escapes it. They all get back together, try to fight their fate, but it doesn't really work out so well. And then Jeannie Garofalo goes off to see the tree at the end of the world.
The Yggdrasil.
Yeah, basically. So, I mean, there's a lot of weird shit that happens in this movie. It's the plot is actually one of the more interesting parts of it. The plot and the philosophy that goes around that, I think. So I guess that would probably go into themes as well. But there is like this feeling of we're just throwing a bunch of weird stuff at you to like kind of see how you react to it, or like to kind of see how the audience reacts or get a reaction out of them. When the cats like kind of invade, I was thrown for sure, and like trying to figure out what the heck was going on for a lot of this, or like what it was supposed to mean, because it's a movie that like seems to have a deeper philosophy, and certainly does to some extent. And then it seems like some of it is just put in there for like surreal effect. So what do you guys think?
So I said that pretty much almost verbatim to E when we were pre-discussing it earlier, that yes, it has an overarching through line and a plot that goes on, right? But then it sort of interrupts itself with like these random non sequiturs between characters, which aren't like completely out of place, but they do sort of halt the action of like the Lovecraftian stuff of like, right, like, oh, Deborah, the main character voiced by Janine, right, finds basically a fanzine which explains like there's an invasion of giant cats and other weird Lovecraftian, surreal things that they try to figure out what's happening and like, uncover more information, etc. But then they'll have like a conversation between the 4 or 5 characters that doesn't necessarily relate to the plot at large. However, I will, like, for the most part throughout it, and obviously, like the way you describe Sivo, like at least your tone of voice, it seems you liked it the least, or like didn't like it as much, anyways. So I'm looking at a solid enough 2, given the caveat that it sort of interrupts itself and can undercut itself here and there, and this will go to themes as well. But just plot wise, I'm looking at it 2. So
So this is a very abstract piece. whether you think that the narrative through line is effective or not is really the debate here. But I just want to set you the sense that this reminded me quite a bit, and this is going to go into my discussion on themes, that this, we talked about Scott earlier, and you said that this reminds you of early Adult Swim. That's not what hit me with this. This is 90s MTV. When you wake up at 2 a.m, this Aeon Flux comes on before this, followed by Beavis and Butthead.
Liquid television.
Yeah.
And whether that style works for you or not is really up to taste.
Kind of lives or dies on that.
But thematically, and what the messages they were saying, occasionally it was heavy-handed in the points they're making, because it is a story about sensory overflow and too much information. They legitimately have the world invaded by cat memes and I guess ultra violence to the snake, if you want to interpret it that way, but also the snake representing narcissism and whatnot, however you want to break it down. But the idea is it's for you to be overwhelmed by the
Sensory elements
yeah.
or something.
And again, and because it's open to interpretation and open to personal tastes, it worked for me. Would I give it a 3? Probably not. Although I really do appreciate the Don Hertzfeldt ending
Vibe to it.
that they had, which they show a bunch of kind of what I felt like failed early projects by the and mocking modern culture out of issue. So yeah, I'm going to give it a strong 2, but I don't think I give it a 3 for the lack of universal appeal to it.
I'm going to, I was thinking about this quite a bit. And I think the last 15 minutes, which you were just talking about, who did you say that reminded you of the?
He did a work called Rejected,
Okay.
which is famous for My Anus is Bleeding, which
I'm a banana, etc.
yeah, my spoon is too big.
Well, there is. I think that would have that ending probably would have worked better as a through line, something that had kind of come back, because there was a meta aspect to it, and it would have worked a lot better.
Then watch Rejected. Do it right now.
It would be better intermixed in the thing. Yeah, this thing totally did remind me of the liquid television and the stuff they do on MTV. The mid 90s. I remember I'd come home from work and pick up my friends. We'd come over to my house and smoke a bowl and do some mind erasers, which are vodka, Kahlua, and seltzer water. And you drink it with a straw.
I love mind erasers.
Yeah.
You might want to drink a couple of those while you're listening to us.
I'm just doing it in case, some of our younger audience doesn't know. Drink it with a straw. It doesn't work otherwise. And we used to watch liquid television. Like, one of my favorite things was Psychogram, where this guy's like, "Dear Mom," and he'd show random postcards and tell what was going on. That's what the ending reminded me of, and I really wish it was a through line, because that was one of the things that they would do, in liquid television, was that through line. So that part of it threw me. A lot of what I'm going to probably say has to go into themes. But I'm going to go with a 2. I'm not going to say it's a super strong 2, because there were some things I wish that were, I don't know. I like random shit. I totally love, I was totally in the groove with this, but there were parts where where I was kind of like, those little things would have worked better intermixed, because some of it, as you guys like to say a lot, was jarring in a not good way. And I think something even more jarring going back to it would have kind of even keeled it, if that makes sense.
No, I absolutely understand what you're saying about it.
Yeah.
I kind of agree with all of you guys. I didn't give a score before, but here's what I'll say to give my last little thing. Ian, I completely agree with you. This does feel like mid 90s MTV animation. But it doesn't, like, the jokes, it's supposed to be funny, and I think it was supposed to be a lot funnier than I found it, I guess. which I
Mileage may vary.
Like I like those 90s MTV shows. I thought Daria was hilarious. I thought Beavis and Butthead was hilarious. Like this one didn't land. And also what really bugged me a few times was every time they talk about like relationships, it gets really weird and like sophomoric and like just bad dialogue. And like, I just didn't understand why any of that was in there at all.
We'll come back to that, I think, seriously, in dialogue.
Perhaps we can, take that down to a terrible translation or something, but like those parts, and there were like 3 or 4 of them scattered throughout the movie, just made it bad for me on those parts. So I think I'll go with a 2. I agree. Like I do like certain parts of this, and I like when they try to work the plot into the overarching philosophy that they're trying to establish. But I'm probably the weakest 2 of everybody here. So
I feel you.
I'm going to give credit for one thing. There was one point, and I really wish I could remember because there was a lot of sitting at desks drawing, but one of the sitting at draw drawing, there was a legitimate jump scare that jumped me that I was just like, whoa.
Yeah.
So, when the old lady reaches over?
That might have been it, yeah.
Yeah, it is
Yes, that was exactly it, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that part was effective. Like it worked, but when it didn't work, it really didn't work for me. So anyway, it's 2s all around for that. Ian, talk about themes.
Okay. I have a lot to say about this, so I apologize for rambling up front. The reason I keep hearkening back to the 90s with this is because this is an Argentinian film. And the 90s in America was a cultural response to the consumerism of the 80s. The Gen X trying to move their identity forward from the corporatism of the 80s and the identity angst that they felt. So a lot of the work that was created at that time, whether it be Daria, or I would even go to stuff like, this reminded me quite a bit of Super Jail, if you remember that.
Jesus, yes, thank you, indeed.
But a lot of like kind of experimental art in order to, Ren and Stimpy's are actually a great one for this, of being weird for the sake of breaking from the social norms of the time. The problem is that we're in 2020 America, which has, if you look at like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there's a point, a culture where a culture is stable enough that people are trying to express themselves differently than the stability of the culture at the time. Now, this doesn't work in modern day America because we're in chaos. Thus, you see things like Nomadland, or harkening back to Trial of Chicago 7, a Judas and the Black Messiah, which is the art we're producing now. This isn't the art we're producing anymore. And that's why, Chris, I'm interested to see your point of view because you grew up in the Gen X identity, existential crisis that this kind of work is representing.
Exploring.
That said, this is really representing the struggle of the artist between being an artist and identifying as one in a place of sensory overload of modern consumerism, which the Game of Thrones in this is Game of Clones. Yes, that's the sophomore joke, but it's also the idea of like, do tattoo artists represent true art now? Versus when she eventually meets with the group she thinks is going to save all of them, but that's almost art school, where she's forced to then produce art that is considered en masse, but is also not allowed to be individualistic, not allowed to be unique. It's about copying the art that exists. So there is a great argument in this about the existential struggle of the artist producing work in modern day society, modern day Argentinian society, because I don't think that reflects modern day American culture, which is dealing with the despair we're feeling all around. So I appreciate what this is trying to say, even if it doesn't reflect our American culture anymore. Also, I really enjoyed, though, what I do think reflects is the fat friend who's, what's his name?
Sam, I believe, Samuel.
Who misinterprets every single situation he's in, and almost in a sense, there's also a whole undercurrent of narcissism in here, and he's reflecting everything upon his narcissistic viewpoint of how society should reflect upon him. My favorite one is, it's really cool that his two friends he thinks are bisexual because that still includes him. But the minute he's out, oh no, they're lesbians. And I thought that was a really good critique on gender politics in modern day. But anyway, enough said. I've spoken for too much of a length, but I appreciate this for what it tried to do.
Chris, why don't you go since he...
Yeah, I was going to say I wore the wrong... I picked the wrong week not to wear a skinny puppy shirt because the reason I'm saying that is because my friend Jen and I would always say, as we went to the 90s and looking back, the Reagan Thatcher era, a lot of bands owed their and even to Bush. I mean, I'm still mad at Andrew Eldritch for not, putting out a Trump album because he put out a Bush album and he promised, a George H.W. Bush, not a George W. Bush. Skinny Puppy put out the George W. Bush album. The encore when I went to see them in 2004 was Fuck Bush, everybody was shouting. So, but the thing is, the reason I bring Skinny Puppy up is because unlike a lot of bands from the 80s, Sisters of Mercy included, everybody either stopped producing or kept giving us the same thing over and over again, and love them or hate them, hate their albums. Skinny Puppy has never made the same record twice. They even, like in one record, a couple records ago, they went back to one of their earlier sounds, but gave it a modern, cleaner thing. Yeah, my whole point in how this relates to the film is that when you get into the 90s, okay, so we have MTV takes off, in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, when we get things like Adult Swim, or not Adult Swim, Liquid Television, and you start having all these fucking reality shows that start to kick in. All of a sudden, we're finding, ironically enough, the attention spans getting smaller and smaller. So in a lot of ways, like if we're going to talk about MTV and so forth, MTV changed, but like got so far away from where it began. And I think this work does a really great job of talking about low attention spans. You talk about the 90s being a reaction, like, we're giving up consumerism. No, we've just modified consumerism. I mean, we went from the Reagan era and yuppies to this whole, the Gen X thing where the hipsters came from, I guess, where you repackaged corporatism. And I feel like this film in a lot of ways is ageless because you do have the aesthetic that would have been, late 80s, early 90s, definitely going into the 90s. But it also transcends that to incorporate a lot of what is going on today. So there is very much a nostalgic component to it. There is very much a now component to it. But the thing is, I do get that thing that resonates where things don't change. They just modify because you have the two things where you have everything digital. It's like, oh, no. The comics are coming to save us, the printed word. And the art school aspect of it. And I was looking this up before. I was reminding me a lot of the that one of the controversial intros for The Simpsons where they showed the Korean artists, basically, in a sweatshop. Yeah, that kind of reminded me of it. So I found this film to be, while you're watching, it's a great film in retrospect because when you're watching it, you're not putting all the pieces together. And when you're analyzing it, and even after what you said, kind of pushed me into a different direction. I apologize for going on, but all of a sudden I'm like, oh yeah, some other synapses were connecting, because this film very much does everything old is old. Everything old is new again. We're repackaging it, but then there is the nostalgia aspect. But at the end of the day, it's all some kind of sensory overstimulation. We all have to, in a lot of ways, this film is actually like a motion comic, which is the thing I got right away. It kind of had the feel that, you have where it's a motion comic. So I'm sorry it took so long. You know, you brought up a bunch of ideas that I hadn't even considered. So I'm giving this a very strong one. It's a really fascinating. It's a fascinating film, and I don't even know if I did this justice or threw a bunch of stuff out. But
No, I actually appreciate everything you had to say, and but my one difference is that you said that it's a timeless thing. I'm arguing that different cultures reach these kind or have
Milestone.
different philosophical bents when it approaches art. I don't know much about Argentinian art aside from Distinguished Gentlemen and this. I haven't seen much from them, so I'm just assuming from the work that their culture has reached a area where we've descended from since the 90s.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think that in terms of themes, this movie is trying to say a lot and does fairly well. I think this is one of the strongest, if not the strongest point of the film, is it's trying to talk about consumerism, it's trying to talk about art versus the world, basically, right? Like, no matter who she finds, you know, she's got enemies on all sides as the artist, right? And you know, she finds this group that she thinks is going to help her, but like you said, like that's almost like art as capitalism, or
Mass-produced art. Yeah,
exactly. It's really interesting that they like show that the images that are coming on the TV are like on the snake that's eating the world tree at the end, and you know, I'm sure there's a lot that I missed the first time in terms of the themes, but you guys, both of you, said quite a bit. I think I like the themes plenty good enough to give it a 1 for this.
yeah. I mean, yes, you guys cover a lot of ground, and like I think maybe my point is like that's why you should give it a 1, because it throws all this shit at you. Now, does it all stick? Maybe not, but is it all substantial? I think for the most part, yes. And even if sometimes this might bleed in the dialogue or maybe style even just a bit, but just to sort of, you know, back it up, that it sometimes can be in your face. Like, here's the characters be like, let's talk about this very specific theme right now, right? Like they're turning to each other and like, you know, just do a little scene or sort of non sequitur section, like I mentioned. But that means it's not devoid of themes. It's trying its damnedest and earnestly to address like a very huge broad range of things, which, yeah, E, to you and Chris's point, like maybe the cultural dial is not on the same, you know, equaling up to where we are because it's produced in a different culture, in a different, you know, outside of America, outside of our country, at least the country we live in. But it sort of doesn't matter in the sense that it's moot that it does have something to say, and whether or not you agree with it, whether or not you think it's executed well or not, like that's always going to be subjective, but it's clearly earnestly intending to convey a number of ideas, and I think it does it well enough for me for a 1.
And two other things I noticed onto the themes is I like the way it was divided into sections, because speaking of short attention spans and everything's like thrown at you, I thought it was a really nice, you know, it's great, which is why I wish, you know, that it was the other thing, the end was intersected. Number 2, it's also interesting, Ian, that you were saying about the Gen X thing, is because comics had a renaissance in the 80s where we got like the Dark Knight and everything. And then it came back huge in the mid 90s and
really
stayed. So, you know, to your point, Ian.
Yeah, right on, Chris.
Yep.
Yeah, very, very good point.
All right, cool. Sounds good. Scott, why don't you talk about antagonists?
All right, so this one is one of the ones that had like a question mark / like what about it. So I guess if we look at it in terms of narrative of what's like literally happening like in the story, that some kind of outside meme force personified or something, like, you know, like the fucking Yorgum deer, I suppose, is invading their world and is influencing, like, if you're an artist, then you're good to go. Like you're not like affected by the signal, which puts people into a catatonic coma-esque state, and therefore like renders them I don't know, like not void, like renders you pointless in a sense. Like, I don't know, like it's almost like a flash forward, Steve, where we're like, oh, if you're driving a bus or driving a car and you look at your phone and you see the signal, then you crash your car and like it just causes chaos. And then of course like the very like the old chestnut trope, the military rolls in and they try to blow the big cats away, like all this shit, right? But what's antagonizing the central characters? Like it's both that and themselves, like them finding themselves. Like you could point to like a cocktail of both, like in a sense. But I guess to me, as I talk it out, and maybe you guys convince me like either way, like more, that I think it is leaning towards a 1, only in the sense that there was some kind of whatever was antagonizing each them at any point, and even again like Jürgen Deer, etc., overarchingly, whether it was a meta sort of commentary, a meta antagonist, if you will. I think it was effective. I think it was well done, and it made enough sense to the story as such, as set up to me, that I'm going to give it a solid 1. And clearly you're want to say something.
Well, I agree that the main characters of this were thoroughly antagonized. I also got a distinct feeling that the creator of this was antagonized completely by consumerism.
I like that, yeah.
Yeah, that's fifth level meta.
Fifth dimensional chess or whatever.
I feel someone screaming with frustration with this work. And if the art is a reflection of the artist, then this is a very personal work. I'm quite certain that many characters in this represent people that are personal to the creator. I feel that there are oftentimes references to things that are both to Argentina, to that generation, which I'm not part of anymore, and or to the youngest generation I'm not part of anymore. I feel that there's a great amount of angst that goes into this. And yeah, perhaps that's a cop-out in certain ways, but I feel that I viscerally heard the screaming of frustration from the author of this. So I have to give that a 1.
To some degree, I can agree with you. I think that you're right. Like the frustration of the characters seems to be an outpouring to some degree of the frustration of the creator, right? But like you said it, you said exactly what I was thinking. It was like, this feels like angst, and it almost feels like I don't know. It's like this expression of like almost childlike or like teenage like artists don't get what they deserve, and like, you know, artists are being treated like shit and by everyone else, and perhaps that's the case, but it feels like this like it feels like it could have been a much stronger antagonist if it was a little bit more focused to me.
So did we do Rejected as a Mott's? I know we did, one other.
Yeah. We did I forget what it was called, but It's a Beautiful Day.
Yes.
Yeah. Rejected is a 1-to-1. You can make a 1-to-1 comparison to that. And I think Rejected is a better work. It's recognized as one of the best versions of this. But I would say there's a strong antagonist in Rejected, even if there's no physical manifestation of that. It's his frustration. It's Don Hertzfeld's frustration with trying to enter the corporate world as an artist. And you know what? Like, the thing is that an invalid argument? I think, because I know a little bit what it's like to be professionally.
I'm not by any means saying that this is an invalid antagonist. What I'm saying is I don't think it
wasn't utilized
in this work. Like, there is a physical antagonist in it. It's like the invading alien forces.
All those witches are terrifying.
Yeah, exactly.
More, I believe.
And the cats sitting around are like scary gargoyles, scary fluffy gargoyles. But like, I just think that this could have been. This feels more. I don't want to use like. I feel like I'm going to use a word that seems really denigrating, but like, I think it could be stronger. It feels almost like impetuous or something like that. You know, like. Sure. I don't have exactly the words that I want to describe this right at my disposal right now, because I'm really struggling with it. But it just feels like I said earlier, I used the term sophomoric. It feels like there's a stronger work in this director to perhaps to come.
To convey.
And this is like a seed of something that's a great idea, but I want it to be stronger and more focused and just like in my mind better. So I'm gonna give Antagonist a 0 with like hope for the future, you know?
You know what? I 100% agree with that. I don't. I can totally see that point. I'm more forgive. I'm getting soft in my old age, so I'm giving it a 1. But I agree with your assessment on that.
Go ahead, Chris.
I'm actually going to. I agree with both of you. I get a huge sense of frustration with this, and I do see various, antagonists. See, fuck! I was about to say I agree more with Steve-O, but now I'm like sitting here going, well, there is the whole thing about the witch. Okay, like ignore her and she won't find you. Is definitely a great nod to consumerism, corporatism.
Sure, of course.
What the whole thing is, like you said before, the tattoo, is tattoo truly an art form, and yeah, it is. It's like when Roger Ebert said video games aren't art. Yeah, they fucking are. They're art. So I'm kind of on the fence in this because every time I talk myself into one thing, I'm talking myself out of the other one. I am gonna say, at the end of the day, I think I'm gonna give it a 1 because I do feel the frustration with this, and while I agree with everything that Steve-O said, these invading factors, while lacking maybe individual coherences, there is an overarching, because this is one of those films where we're going to say because of the themes, ... this works. So I'm going to have to give this a 1.
I'm going to add 2 things. First of all, Steve-O, as a wannabe struggling artist, as we all are, how can you not give that as an antagonist a 1?
But I need it to be better.
I understand. But secondly, like, and I just thought of this as you guys were all talking. It's almost as if the famous work of art itself, The Scream. You can fucking feel the palpitation of frustration coming off of this movie, right? In the same way the waves of that portrait come off. So I'm saying for those 2 reasons, I'm moving it still a 1, but a stronger 1 even than originally I thought. So
I just want one last thing to say. When we started this podcast, I told my dad about it. He goes, "Oh, so you like Wayne's World?" And I'm like, "Oh, but one, I appreciate that, but 2, I was very angry with that comparison." No, I'm not in my basement in Aurora, Illinois. Yeah, exactly. But that level of frustration is exactly what I felt that the creator coming through. So,
and another reason to give that I'm going to give props for that, Ian, to your point, is I've seen other works where people are frustrated, and I'm blocking the couple that come to my head that I often refer to. Oh fuck, that I often refer to. I just knocked my headset out. But generally speaking, a lot of times, like frustrated pieces of work come off as, "Oh, poor me." The world. What was that? What was that stupid movie we saw by D.W. Griffiths? Intolerance. That was like 3 hours of him whining about how people don't understand. This work was not a whine fest. This was frustration, but he was able to remove himself from it in a way that a lot of people can't.
Yeah, no, agreed. Right on. I'm still for that. Like for the things you just said, stronger than I thought.
All right. That's 3 ones. I'm going to stick with a 0 on that. And Chris, talk about protagonist.
And our protagonist is Deborah. Voiced by the American version's voiced by Janine Garofalo, and I liked her quite a bit. The romances I thought were interesting in that we go and try to put labels on everything. Are you bisexual? Are you lesbian? I'm thinking, it's like I'm ending things with you, and it's just like, yeah, I agree with you 100%. It's just like there's this whole flightiness of relationships, and I thought that was interesting. But overall, I like her journey. I thought she was a really great protagonist, where she was also involved, but also she was really good when she was involved with something. She was also very good when she was an observer. And I like the fact that There, this is going into something that we're going back to themes, so I'm not going to do that. But I was quite fond of her. She definitely, Daria was an archetype for her, and I mean that in a very good way. I mean that is a very good that is a
Daria
compliment.
was my first love. So.
I can see why.
And many of us from that generation, sure, go ahead.
Yeah. So, even as a 20-something, I was quite fond of Daria. I kind of felt weird because I knew she was in high school. So maybe I better not think that.
She was a senior.
Yeah.
All right.
If she's not 18, I can't really say that. But no, I thought she was a very effective protagonist, and I'm giving her a 1.
She's a fucking fictional character anyways, animated. But the point is, yes, and the thing is, like, I'm sorry if I probably steal this from you, E, or one of you even, like, when you think of, like, Janine Garofalo just has that voice and those mannerisms to embody like a character like this, specifically in animated form and format, right? And to your point, Chris, yeah, I think Deborah had a great arc. Like, they filled out, you got more than enough of what you need to know about her setting, about her situation, etc. Right? And then the Lovecraftian cats, etc. like happened in the world in which she's set up in. And for the most part, it made sense. And I was invested in her story, even if, again, like we said, it sort of like could take at times a weird U-turn or like just an off ramp from where it was initially going. But eventually it get back there. It came back to the highway, to use this metaphor, to run with it. But all that to say, like, yeah, I think it was effective and she was a good character. And again, maybe that's sort of a lot of credit to Janine herself and just how she's like fits into a character like this, a la Daria, a la like the MTV stuff that we brought up earlier. So all I'm saying is, like, I'm giving her a solid to strong 1 for those reasons. Good, buddy.
Also, I want to, since you brought up the relationships, and we didn't, there's one, I don't know if this is intended or not, but it seems to me as I grow older, those relationships in the 20s always feel more important than they actually were. And they actually, if anything, ruin the narrative of your life and divert you, and you're all of a sudden...
Well, I agree with that.
Angsting over something that's really unimportant in the long run. And that kind of felt what the relationships were in this. Like, yeah, we have actual problems. We're going to now break off of this to deal with personal issues that don't matter in the long run. And it worked for me. But yeah, on her realizing her growth through dealing, how do I become an artist in an environment that's saturated? How do I'm going to try to do it the professional way. Oh, it's just a farm where I have to produce the classic works over and over again. To her kind of going through the fact that art is narcissistic. Actually, I believe the snake itself is
Narcissia.
Boros, yeah.
Yeah. To her realizing to pursue her own thing. Like, I enjoyed it, so we went into 1.
It's interesting. Like, I won't disagree with you that any of that is true. But her, like, arc to me wasn't a super full one. Like, it wasn't like filled with a lot of change from her, I guess, so much. Or maybe I'm just like thinking about it wrong. But like, I don't like, there was yes, like a lot of her arguing with like characters about who she didn't want to and did want to fuck, and like kind of just these like, oh shit, there's fucking giant monsters outside that want to kill us, like let's order a Barbie gun and like let's run to these people who we think are going to help us. Nope, we find out that they're not going to help us, let's run away. And like, I guess her going and finding the tree at the end is supposed to be like her like ultimate realization, seeing the,
I think it is that, buddy.
Like strangled by the Ouroboros, which a lot of mixing philosophical
mythologies.
metaphors, I suppose. But
Whatever.
Maybe that's the point. Like, sorry, that was going to say. Go ahead.
sure, but I don't see her having like a really strong arc. I think that she's just kind of like transported through this plot, through the story. I'm not sure that she changes a ton or like learns something or whatever. I think that Janine Garofalo does a fine job. In fact, I think she's the best actor in this movie by like a pretty wide margin. In terms of the English voices, I'm not sure. I would be interested to see how like good the English translation was, because at times
Good
it
point.
felt like really stilted and weird. And I was like, why is
I was waiting to speak about
why
that in
is Janine
dialogue, but you're right.
Garofalo- Yeah, I mean, we'll get to that more in dialogue. But anyway, that said, I'm really struggling on this one because I don't know if I'm going to give it a 1 or a 0. You guys all gave it 1 so far.
Yeah. All right. How about this? Like, just real quickly, last thing for me on this front is that I think she had enough agency as a character. Again, given the context, sure, sometimes she didn't see well, but she did make decisions, and I think she did learn something about herself in the long run to strengthen the character as a whole.
And if she didn't learn what she wanted, she learned what she didn't want. And I think that's part of the why this is a slightly, if you could feel immature work. You said you hope for bigger and better things, because it feels like a creator is still in the process of figuring things out, and them saying, at this point, I realize what I don't want, and this is what the artwork represents.
Speaking of Gen X and Janine Garofalo and doing a piece on modern whatever, in a lot of ways this is what Reality Bites should have been. I hate
No, that's so good.
Bites.
Seriously, Chris,
I fucking hate Reality
that is
Bites.
amazing.
But this is what it should have been.
That is so fucking great. Like,
Fair
I'm
enough.
so glad you mentioned that. That is fucking
Is
fantastic.
that the one with Ben Stiller going corporate at the end?
Yep,
Yeah.
Eden Hogg and Ben
That's what I
Stiller.
mentioned earlier.
Oh, that's the
what
one
I'm
you were
trying to
thinking
yeah.
of? Yep. Okay.
Oh wait, so you were thinking of that when you with this too?
He was like, "What's the one with Ben Stiller?" And I was like, "An animated thing." He was like, "No, it's a movie." And like, we couldn't think of the name, but it's Rowdy Bites. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. 1. And then it's to me for supporting.
Nice.
These characters are weird. I don't like any of them. I don't really like any character in this movie, to be honest. Like, I'm not sure that you're supposed to. I mean, Janine Garofalo maybe is the closest that I get to it, but like
He's not supporting though.
everyone else is kind of shitty and as a person. Except for who was the Mr. Gutierrez?
Best character.
Uh-huh.
Was he the one that got killed by the
The witch, yeah.
Bad guy.
Man, they had some interesting side characters, and then they were just like, fuck off, like whatever, you're gone. The 3 main supporting are, they're there just to kind of let Janine Garofalo play, her character Deborah play off of them for the most part. I mean, they all have their own. They actually are fairly well fleshed out in
They've got
terms of they have their own personalities and stuff. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I don't. I'll be brief, but like Steve-O, on one end, that's kind of the point, right? Like, they're the caricatures that your friends are. Like,
If it's the point, that doesn't mean I have to like it.
I understand that. Like, certainly, like, trust me, I get it. But I guess I'm arguing like I'm on the opposite side of the coin in a sense that like that's why they work in a sense, like especially Mr. Gutierrez and like much of others, like Edgar, her crush, love, etc. Like they serve their role as 1.5-ish dimensional personalities within it. So like to me, it made sense because of the world that was set up and what unfolded afterwards. So that's my reasoning for giving this secondary 1, but that's all I'm gonna say.
Samuel is one of the most realistic portrayals of a character I've seen. everyone knows the Samuel, and if you don't know them, you're the Samuel. I just say I thought he is such a I love Mr. Gutierrez, but he is, if I'm maybe reading into a little bit too much, but is the only really older character in this who seems like they know what's going on, and then they're gone before he can actually affect the narrative. And if the story is about Deborah's realization that she has to create an identity for herself, and all the fall parts, she loses the one older character who knows what's going on. Her friends are turning to be just as shallow as all around. It worked for me, so I'm going to give it a 1.
What? All right. Try not to retread what we said on the Johnny Mnemonic episode, but or not even Johnny Mnemonic, about how Neo was in Matrix. Janine Garofalo does have agency. She's also an observer, and I love the flighty nature of all the supporting characters, because you sit as an observer, whether or not you are guilty of the same things. And I can say that we probably all are, whether or not we acknowledge
Spoiler, we are, but...
And I think she does too. But I thought it was really great that amongst this chaos was chaos, because there's a lot of things with these supporting characters with regards to caretaking, with regard to identity, with regard to, are you team tech? Are you team pen and ink? So I think that the message of this film through our protagonist could not exist without the agency, or sometimes the lack thereof. The agency is given and taken away, or people take it or give it away in this. So I'm definitely giving them collectively a 1. I thought they all served their points pretty well.
And just one last point, Mickey at the end, begging for scraps, was one of the most passive-aggressive characters I've ever seen.
Where does that
That's
leave
right.
you?
I guess you could count all those final animations as supporting characters.
See, I'm not, but I still liked it anyway.
I think they're all their own thing, kind of. But God, yeah. I mean, I guess you're right. I guess I can collectively give these characters a 1. They do all, serve their purpose.
They round it all out.
All right, fine. I'll give
Reluctant 1 from Stephen Amosi.
Ian, talk to us about dialogue.
This is, I think, perhaps the weakest section of this work. I would have liked to seen a more polished script, and I think that I also think that a lot of the critiques done throughout this entire review have been about referencing the dialogue, that perhaps a better script would have made a clearer thematic. Perhaps the asides and the non sequiturs would have worked better if it were. It carried me through the work, but I'm not going to remember this work at all by its dialogue. So I'm initially a 0, but I could be convinced up to a 1 because I don't hate it. But
I'm going to back it up because I had !/0 for this question in my initial impressions, right? And we stated this earlier. It may be like percentage X, percentage Y of A, the scripting in general, and B, the translation, perhaps, right? Like maybe that might be a little factor as well. But I agree with you, E, that even if we, especially in light of giving themes a 1, they were conveyed through dialogue. Now, however, I felt that the dialogue itself, like moment to moment, I guess the way I want to say, was just, left something wanting, I think, as you said, Steve-O. Like, it just didn't quite get their gel, etc., as we say, Chris. So all that to say, like, yeah, I'm leaning towards a solidish 0 on this front. And you, like as you said, if there's a weak point, if there's a chink in the armor of this film, I think it is a dialogue, so I'm sticking with that. I'm pretty staunchly in a 0-ish position right now. So
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely going to give dialogue a 0. Honestly, I think that the reason that I guess, like, as you said earlier, you think, like, if I'm the most, or if I like this film the least of all of us, the reason is the dialogue.
yeah,
It felt wooden. There were times where people were answering questions that, like, somebody else said 2 sentences before they stopped talking. Like, it just, I don't, like, I'm sure translation has something to do with it, but it also, like, if that translation was spot on and this dialogue is really good, this is a really good movie. And, like, maybe that's a lot of why I'm, like, kind of didn't like it as much, is because, like, it had a lot there. And, like, this could have been like a surreal, like, fucking masterpiece if the dialogue and the script was better, like, just better. You know, I like all the set pieces. I like the part, like, the characters, what they represent. I like all the themes that are going into it. The plot is nonsensical, but it's supposed to be. It kind of does it in the right way. Just, you need that dialogue there. It's a talking
Glue it
movie.
together.
Like, there's a lot of talking that happens in it. It's a lot of, like, explaining your philosophical ideas, and it just feels like that's the part that's least developed of the whole script and the whole project. And, like, that's why I was kind of frustrated watching this, because I was like, there's a really good movie in here. I mean, it's still, like, I know you guys like this quite a bit more than I do, but, like, there's a very, very good movie that I really would have loved in here if the dialogue was better.
I feel you. I get it.
And, you know, I guess that's why I'm going to go with a 0.
It's really funny because I think the dialogue was absolutely appropriate for this film. The problem is, and it's not even a problem. It's I agree with you. If it was more nuanced, it probably would stand out. But the thing is, the dialogue gets pushed. It's not even a matter of it being of just being casual, or I can't remember the word I always use.
Informal, naturalistic, organic.
More naturalistic and organic. But the problem is, it is so much so that it's meshed in with everything else. I mean, I understand the dialogue was there and it was great, but in a way, sometimes I feel like a lot of it, they didn't need dialogue. The same message was conveyed, and that the dialogue was just to kind of shape that. But the problem is, except for the one thing where it's just like, oh, it's a good thing we're animated. The couple of times where they point out, like, that little meta aspect, the dialogue gets washed in with the actions. And I don't think that that is not a criticism of it, but it also means I can't give it a 1.
So, Chris, if it was more naturalistic and they were doing a juxtaposition between the absurdity and the naturalism, that would have worked. If the dialogue had been more absurdist to meet the art, but the way it was clashed. That's what I'm kind of like, listening to you, I gathered from it.
I don't know. To me, it's like me wearing a green shirt now and the dialogue being a half shade lighter or darker than it. In other words, yeah, you can make it out, but it's part of the overall color of my shirt. And like I said, that's not a bad thing, maybe stylistically or thematically, but if we are going to rate it on dialogue, it is not, you know, it is by design. I can't give it a 1.
No, absolutely. I 100% feel you. And that's kind of, you kind of rephrase me, Chris. So that's also I'm giving a 0 to at the end of the day.
Okay. So I think that's 0s for dialogue. And Scott, talk to us about style.
Well, we've covered it quite a bit extensively, and I'm looking at a 1 because it's a mismatch. It's like a cocktail of, like, again, early Beavis and Butthead, Dario, of course, like King of the Hill, even like Pendleton Ward shit, right? Throw that shit all in a blender, and, like, it's cool looking. Like, if nothing else, you can appreciate the art style, I think, of this film, because it has its own distinct feel, but it's clearly influenced by those the things I just said and a number of other things in a similar vein. Again, but with its own, like, just own little, like, flair to it in a sense. So I don't have much to say. It's just that if there's one aspect, one like thing that stands out about Lava to me, at least, it's the art itself, the animation, etc., the characters, like the way they're drawn, the way they're animated, the way they're depicted, etc. So I think it's a one strongly, and if not the strongest one, maybe tied with themes or something, but that's where I stand. So
I just love the fat guy being pawed by the cat back and forth. I thought that was a really good scene. But overall, I enjoyed the heck out of the art style of this. It was weird. It was also at times beautiful. I think he captured. So yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind. I don't mind the art style of this. I think that it's pretty good. I don't know if I would call it like amazing or anything, but there's the one thing that I do remember seeing, and I was like, did they do that on purpose or did they just like really screw this up? Was there's a point where Janine Garofalo is like walking down this, or Deborah's like walking down the street, and then she just gets like smaller and smaller and fades into the sidewalk, and it's like, you guys did not do perspective correctly at all in this scene, and like I don't know if you did that on purpose or
I think
not.
that was on purpose because
But it makes like, explain to me why it was on purpose. Like I have no idea what they were doing with it. But other than that, I thought it was fine, and like it is an interesting style of art. At least like it'll catch your eye. Like the way that the witch is done is really cool. The way that they do the tree of the Yggdrasil. And the all the snake art and all that stuff, it definitely has its own style. I don't know if there's more animation like this coming out of Argentina or not, but it's it's kind of almost feels like the way that a lot of like Cartoon Network shows are doing animation now. But it feels like it's got its own like flavor that maybe it comes from like that area, right? Because like a lot of those Cartoon Network shows come out of like I forget, some school in California. I forget which school, but they, like a lot of the people that graduate from there do a lot of the shows, so that's why they all kind of look similar and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, I can give style a 1. I think it's pretty well done, and it's got. I'm pretty sure this is a pretty low budget film. And for that, I think they do a good job.
Sorry, I got one more for you, go, Chris. Ugly Americans, if anyone remembers that, also got vibes off of that from this film. So that's all. Good, Chris.
I kind of tie the style in along with the themes. I think it conveys exactly what it needs to and the way it needs to be conveyed. And I will therefore give it a 1.
Okay. It's going to be 1s for everybody. And Chris, keep talking about recommendation.
I do recommend this. I recommend this, and I recommend sitting with it. I recommend this, and I recommend listening to our podcast, and then rewatching. I mean, it is a film that I'd like to revisit because there's a lot of sensory overstimulation when you watch it. And that's kind of the point. Because when you go back and you reflect upon it, it is part of the, as I said, I think a lot of the high scores we gave it are because it reflects the theme so well. So yeah, I'm giving it a recommendation.
Not being the biggest fan of animation out there, it's kept my interest the entire time. I was fascinated by where it was going. I was satisfied with the conclusion. And I enjoyed the journey. So yeah, I'll give it a recommendation. If a slightly tepid one, it was
somewhat in that vein. Like, I'd recommend it more than I wouldn't. And like that's sort of like sometimes, Steve-O, you might say that like amongst our circle and just in general, I'd give it like a 60-40 split, 60% recommendation. That is, yeah, if you're into it, and especially like if we just give out the vein like, hey, did you like the MTV stuff? Did you like Daria, etc.? Did you like some early Adult Swim? It's somewhat in that vein. And again, and like you said, Chris, that's a very good point, and we all covered it, that, yeah, upon, like, after watching it and maybe just sitting there and thinking about it and just, like, taking it all in, you might get more out of it than initially seems to be the case. And I think that, more than anything else, perhaps, would be a reason to recommend it. So I'm giving it a 1 to recommend.
You just made two arguments that are like for me 0 and 1 for me. So now they're battling each other out. I mean, you said like, yeah, it actually is a good movie to like sit with a little bit afterwards and think about. So that's pretty good. But you also said I would recommend this to more people than I wouldn't, and I'm not sure that that's the case for me. Okay. It might be. I might go the other way. Yeah, there are certainly people that I would recommend this to for sure, but I think there's less people that I would recommend it to than people that I wouldn't. That said, I think I'm going to give this a recommend at the end of the day because it is one that, like, it further thought about it afterwards is good. And I'm glad that we had this discussion because I feel a little bit, I like this movie a bit more now than it left me feeling after I was done with it. So
To prove the point.
Yeah, I mean,
Actually, oddly enough, Steve, you might have flipped me on recommendation.
Yeah,
Because I don't think a single person I would recommend this to.
Outside of us, for real?
I mean, perhaps Rich or something like that, but like amongst the people I generally talk movies with, I don't think there's too much resonance in there. So I might have to drop that recommendation down to a 0.
I respect
even though
it.
I enjoyed the film.
yeah. I mean,
So does that change your shit as well, Steve-O, or what?
yeah, like I know for sure there are people that I would recommend this to, but there are certainly more people that I would not recommend it to than people that I would.
It's no Perfect Hair Forever episode 1.
Yeah.
Nothing will ever be that.
I think
let's be clear.
I think I have to agree with you, Ian. Like I should have listened to myself from the get-go, but yeah, I think I gotta agree.
Listen to your inner artist.
So yeah, so that's gonna be 2 1s and 2 0s on recommend, right? I gotta tally up, so talk amongst
Split, right? No, I mean, yeah, I think usually here's where we have like final thoughts or anything, but I think we talked it out, and I think the score, if I'm doing it in my head like roughly correctly, will reflect it. So
Well, actually, now, I mean, yeah, it is a great film to sit with, but you and Ian are now maybe switched me back because I'm sitting here going, well, who would I recommend this to? I mean, I enjoyed it.
you recommend to your wife, I would say, and like 5 other friends.
But I don't know if she liked the animation.
3 people who are watching this.
Yes, I would.
You know what? Wait, here's what I'm deciding. I'm going to give it a 1 because we're all one way or another slightly on the fence with this. So why not have our scores reflect it? Two.
I love it, buddy. Yes.
So we'll each speak for each other.
Wonderful, Chris. That
we'll
is
each
perfect.
speak for our own doubts. So yeah,
Way to game the system.
Yep.
So I've been watching movies with H. John Benjamin again. The coach in that is all Steve does math is my spirit animal.
Indeed.
yeah, home movie.
And Lava is somewhat in the same vein of that, in a sense, like in a very broad way. is all.
Yeah, it's very similar actually.
The flowy animation style.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, so all right, that's gonna be 2 8s for Scott and Chris,
Wow,
7 for Ian, and a 6 for me, which is gonna leave us at 7.25 total aggregate score, which is a
Totally fine.
pretty damn good score for this movie. So all right, we're gonna give Lava a 7.25.
Right on.
If anybody else has anything else, otherwise I'm gonna end it off here. I've been your host, Steve Ramosi, joined today by Scott Thurlow.
One day I shall open my 6 mouths and tattoo the tattoo that ends the world. Good night. See you next time.
Ian Manzer.
I wish I remembered one of the coach's dialogue things from Brendan. Brendan, listen to me. Go watch this movie. It's great.
And Christopher Morgan.
hamburgers should be high.
Good night.
Eternally true. Peace.
Editing and engineering by Stephen Hermosi. Music by Christopher Morgan. Check us out on YouTube and iTunes for the shows, and on Facebook and Twitter for updates.
Or mods?